Before you head over for your refreshments, Garry, I would like to ask you a few questions relating to your music, and here we go. Garry, this is a really great quintet you've got lined up tonight, and I notice on your program that you're using a lot of your own original material. Do you prefer to use your own material, or do you like other people's works?
Well, it's challenging to write and play your own composition. I've found of late that I'm very interested in writing for the vibraphone and the marimba, and of course David Vrcic, the drummer in the quintet, and myself do a lot of playing together of vibraphone and marimba. So it's very often our own compositions, or my own compositions, and sometimes we work through tunes by David Samuels and David Friedman, New York musicians.
I mean, you went there a couple of years ago and studied under...
I studied under David Samuels. Yes, I'm very fortunate to, having studied with him in Sydney in the early 1980s. I was fortunate enough to receive a grant to study with him in New York a couple of years ago.
Right. And you've also got Roger Garrood, who's just a monster player. I mean, have you specifically written a piece for Roger, or...?
Well, I think the soprano saxophone goes very well with the vibraphone, as do the flutes, both the alto and concert flute. But Roger is a monster player, not only on soprano and flutes, but on alto and tenor. And you know, anyone that heard him at the Perth Jazz Society last year backing Ben Sidran would bear witness to his superb playing.
Yeah. Do you like working in the quintet environment, or would you prefer working as a three-out thing? Or?
Well, the three-out thing is going to be just for special concerts, I guess, whereas the actual reality of working and playing jazz seems to be that you need to work in an environment with bass and drums, and it's great working with Don on piano, Don Gomes, who incidentally sings extremely well. He's not getting an opportunity to do that on this program, but he's a superb singer as well as being a superb pianist.
Right. Do you think that Australian jazz musicians are gradually getting an Australian jazz sound, and if so, what sort of sound do you think it is to you?
Well, it's always a point of conjecture, I guess, what our influences are in Australia. I think probably the thing that's happening now is that the barriers, especially over the last 10 or 15 years, the barriers between the US and Australia have been broken down, where there's many Australian musicians from every state that have either played in or gone to the US to study. So our influences, which might have been just through recordings of US musicians, are now often from having heard them in a live situation, and that can be very, very different. I think that means that ultimately we'll probably go towards something that's between the US and Europe. And then, of course, we got for the Festival of Perth the band Asia Beat that came out with a truly Asian flavour to their jazz, and you know, I would personally like to see us in the West get more into that Asian sound, just little bits and pieces, I guess.
Yeah, well, we're more geographically zoned that way, aren't we?
That's right. Yeah.
You know, as a musician that's worked both in the East Coast and the West Coast of Australia, do you think that there are differences between East Coast and West Coast musicians?
Well, there's certainly a lot more jazz musicians in, say, Sydney. That's where I used to live, and the standard at the top is very high. Witness musicians such as Dale Barlow and now Mike Knock living there, Roger Frampton, goes on and on. But Bernie McGann, 10-part invention. I shouldn't leave anyone out, I suppose. But I think that we in Perth are perhaps feeling the relationship of the Eastern States bands that the Perth Jazz Society brings over. And I think there's perhaps a greater affinity. Earlier this year, John Pache was over here, and we had a fantastic jam session with John, and you know, the isolation of Perth to the rest of Australia is being broken down, and certainly this ABC series will do a lot to alert the rest of Australia to the standard that we have here. I think it's most important to recognise the role of the jazz studies courses, the three courses out of the WA Conservatorium under Pat Crichton's leadership, because they are making a huge influence, I believe, in this state. Certainly in the short time that I've been in Western Australia, I can see that the depth is there now, and the younger players that are coming through, boy, watch out, you know.
Well, I mean, if David Vrcic, your drummer, is any indication, I mean,
Yes.
he's just evolved into a really mature player, and he's only, what is he now?
20 years,
he's
just
20,
turned 20 years
turned
old,
20.
yes. Yeah.
And he's great, you know,
Yes.
he's just exploding, and it's wonderful.
Yes.
Now, you're doing a piece called Ryan's Ritual. I know you have a son called Ryan.
When I was in New York, I met a teacher there who was teaching sort of African-style xylophone, and I guess there's a little bit of the influence of that in the marimba ostinato that David plays, and in the vibraphone ostinato that I play. And I guess it's, again, it's part of that whole global influence that I believe many people in Australia are trying to get into their music.
Yes. And African, those sort of rhythms are very exciting.
They're very challenging. We haven't tried to write it out, and, you know, if anyone wants to write it out, we'd be most grateful. But it's basically just a feel that we get going, and we've written out the part for Roger on flute, but the actual part that David and I play on Vibes and Marimba is just sort of learnt by rote, which was probably the way that most things in most parts of the world have been learnt in music.
I noticed on the list of the program you had that you were going to do Heartfelt, which I think is one of, you know, I mean, it's one of my favourite pieces, and I hope Roger is going to roar through that like he normally does.
Like an expressway. Yeah.
Well, I better let you get back and finish the last set. And thanks very much, Garry Lee.
Thanks very much, Helen.